It's great to be home. This is home. It's great to be home. We love New York.
Next on Newsmax Prime, Donald Trump loves his homecoming. A huge crowd last night, a major endorsement this afternoon, a huge lead in the polls, but he's still not quite home free in his home state. Those who loathe Trump hope what worked in Wisconsin will also affect the outcome in the Empire State. But does it really all come down to math and money? Then, the money you've put into Social Security, will it end up in the pockets of illegals? It will if President Obama gets his way, and that's not right. We'll tell you all about it as Newsmax Prime starts right now. Good evening and welcome to Newsmax Prime. I'm J.D. Hayworth. Of prime interest tonight, new polls, new life, New York. That's what Donald Trump apparently enjoys this evening as news comes, not totally unexpected, that former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani has apparently endorsed Trump. He says he's going to vote for the Donald. Giuliani adds he didn't like the comments of Ted Cruz concerning New York values. How important is this endorsement? We'll get to it with our panel. Meantime, a new Monmouth poll puts the Republican frontrunner way out in his home state, 52% support. That means a margin of more than 2-1 over his closest competitor. And in the Empire State, John Kasich currently ranks second at 25%, Ted Cruz trailing in third at 17%. So, outside groups like the Club for Growth may try to cut both Trump and Kasich down to size in New York with an ad that apparently worked in Wisconsin.
If you don't want Donald Trump to win, your choice comes down to this: math. Only Ted Cruz can beat Donald Trump. John Kasich can't do it. The math won't work. A vote for Kasich actually helps Trump by dividing the opposition. It's time to put differences aside. To stop Trump, vote for Cruz. Club for Growth is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Joining us now from Newsmax Washington, David McIntosh, the president of the aforementioned Club for Growth, also a former United States congressman from Indiana. In fact, David and I were both elected to the House back in 1994. Also joining us via Skype, John Zogby, founder of the Zogby poll and director of the Keenan Center for Entrepreneurism at his alma mater, Lemoyne College. John is the author of First Global's Understanding, Managing, and Unleashing the Potential of Our Millennial Generation. And there is another participant in this discussion from our Newsmax TV newsroom, former congressional chief of staff, Glen Downs. David McIntosh, first to you. The Club for Growth spent $1 million airing that ad in Wisconsin. What do you have planned for New York?
And thank you, J.D., and it worked very well. Trump had a very bad night last Tuesday. Cruz won. In New York, what we're doing is looking at, depending on where in the state. Upstate, Trump is not as popular. Same thing out on the Long Island. Bronx, he is. And then some areas in Manhattan where you've got more liberal voters, he's also not popular. So the messaging in New York will be more nuanced and depend on the jurisdiction. Bottom line is, if Donald Trump doesn't get 50%, it's a huge loss for him in New York. He may still be on top, but he automatically loses about a third of the delegates when they doesn't get winner take all at that 50%. And that's going to be our strategic goal going into New York. Make sure Donald Trump doesn't get over 50% so that we can continue on to the other primaries.
John Zogby, you heard what David McIntosh had to say about the political geography of New York City, the rest of New York. Do you concur in those areas geographically where Trump might be more vulnerable politically than other areas of the state?
To some degree, I do. When we look at the history of Republican primaries in New York, only about 15% of the vote comes out of New York City. 50 to 55% comes from upstate, and the rest come from the area we refer to as the suburbs, Long Island, Westchester, Orange, Rockland counties, and so on. The problem, however, with that math is that I think Ted Cruz is a much harder sell in New York. New York Republicans are conservative, but they're not social. conservatives. I think it's going to be very difficult. It's not only the quote about New York values, it is also the fact that I think Cruz is just way out of the mainstream of where New York Republicans find themselves.
Dave McIntosh, Club for Growth, absolutely behind Ted Cruz, and now Giuliani goes with Trump, and the New York values line is haunting Ted Cruz. Do you still think the Club for Growth and others can make the case for Cruz in the Empire State?
One of the advantages the Club for Growth has in this is we focus on economic, not social issues. And there's a real contrast that I think could win votes for Cruz upstate, where Trump has said he's for single-payer health care like Obamacare. He's been for tax increases. He doesn't respect property rights with the use of eminent domain to take away people's property and turn it over to developers. And so that message resonates among those conservative voters. I agree with John that Ted Cruz, being a Texan Southerner, is not culturally that appealing as he is in other states. But I think when we focus on the issues, and the club really does that, that's our forte, he's a much better conservative, economic conservative candidate.
And David McIntosh, we know that your duties with the Club for Growth keep you busy right on into the evening. We thank you for your time and being a part of this discussion tonight from Newsmax Washington. Let me turn now to my old friend and a congressional chief of staff, Glen Downs, checking in from the Newsmax TV newsroom. Glen, you've been through more campaigns than you would care to admit, I guess, but with the ringside seat you have for what's going on in this presidential campaign on the Republican side. The Giuliani announcement this afternoon, not totally unexpected, but is this a reaffirmation that will push the Donald even further ahead in the polls in New York?
Well, it certainly doesn't hurt him. Listen, one of the efforts that's being made is to marginalize Trump, particularly amongst establishment figures. When you have someone like Giuliani come out and endorse him, that gives credibility to Trump and make some people comfortable who would otherwise be on the margins, not likely to vote for him. So it's a good plus up for him.
John Zogby, back when Rudy contemplated a run for the U.S. Senate before he was sidelined with health problems. Gosh, that seems like a long time ago. What a matchup that would have been between Giuliani and Hillary Clinton. But the mayor would go through this big explanation, telling me when I was in the House, he said, look, they love me in New York as a mayor, but I'll never win New York City. I'll do better statewide. Is it going to be exactly opposite for Trump, or does he own enough of the city to just really give him the margin across the state?
Here's the problem. Just to repeat, only 15% of that vote in a Republican primary is going to come from New York City. So, Donald Trump is polling very well right now, but I'm not sure that Rudy's endorsement helps. Going back to even more ancient history, remember Rudy endorsed in 1994 Mario Cuomo, and Mario got slaughtered, and in the process, Rudy hurt his brand for a while. Now, of course, we have the post 9/11 Rudy, and that's understandable. But I don't know that the mayor of New York City is any mayor of New York City is a magical name once you go upstate. There is tension between those two.
All right, we move away from endorsements and go back to ads and super PACs. For example, Make America Awesome is an anti-Trump super PAC run by Liz Mayer. Liz was on this program last night disparaging Donald Trump on a whole lot of issues, including border security. Let's listen to what she had to say.
I don't have a problem with people generally working to secure the border, but I don't believe that what Donald Trump is proposing, A, will ever happen, or B, would secure the border if it did happen. And I think it's interesting that only 38% of people want that wall now that they've seen Donald Trump out there talking about it. Support for the wall has actually declined as Donald Trump has advocated for it. So if his concern is securing the border, actually, he probably should shut up at this point. That would probably be more constructive.
Well, aside from that piece of advice, John Zogby, has the immigration issue really cooled off the way Liz maintains it has?
Oh, it sure has. And where are we now? We're in New York, for God's sakes, in Pennsylvania, Rhode Island and Connecticut. Sure, there have been influxes of immigrants into the cities, even rural areas in these parts of the state. But this is not the Southwest. This is not the Deep South. This is a whole different turf. And Donald Trump has hurt himself. He's hurt himself not only on this issue, but hurt himself by alienating women and a whole host of other groups. So he leads in New York and leads handsomely. But I agree with David, what he said. If he doesn't get 50% of the vote, and I think that's not likely, I think he's hurt in the New York primary in a couple of weeks.
Well, right now he is enjoying the lead, but obviously there's a campaign that ensues and several days until the vote is taken. Glen Downs, let me revisit this, and we would note for purposes of full disclosure, you worked for a congressman in a southern state. Obviously, I represented a southwestern state. But the immigration question is more than single issue. It affects entitlements, education, national security. Do you really think this is a, quote, regional issue, as John suggested a second ago?
Well, I certainly would agree you'd need to handle it in a different way than you would in the South or the Southwest, and in a different nuanced sort of way. But in a place like New York, obviously this New York values stuff that is part of the dialogue right now, implies a difference about a lot of different things. But one thing that everyone would agree on is, for example, the issue of terrorism and the national security issue as it relates to security and not knowing who's unvetted coming across the border. I think that can be played in a nuanced way in New York very effectively.
I don't know so much if it's nuance as much as it is a reorientation saying border security is national security, making it very clear in a big, bold New York City kind of way that might reach across the Empire State. But John, you're obviously a guy who studies numbers. And obviously this is an issue about which I feel passionately. But you really think the issue doesn't carry saliency in New York or elsewhere in the Northeast?
Oh, no. It does carry saliency. And there's been an influx of immigrants throughout New York State and the Northeast. And then, of course, ground zero is in New York. And I fully understand that. By the same token, this whole discussion of the wall and Mexico paying for the wall, that is both literally and figuratively thousands of miles away from New Yorkers.
It is, but if you can make them pay for it in terms of confiscating the money sent back home, the remittances, there is a method to what some might think is madness. We'll have to leave it there. John Zogby, Glen Downs, and earlier, David McIntosh, we thank you very much. Now, coming up later in this broadcast, Donald Trump at that huge rally last night in Long Island. In the meantime, if you've got comments on what we've been talking about, send your comments to me at newsmaxtv.com/comments or go to Twitter where our handle is @Newsmax Prime. And we'll be back with more after this.